All right, so get this. Today we're going deep, like deep, into the world of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
The Warrens.
You know those paranormal investigators?
Oh, yeah, the ones whose cases, like, spawned all those horror movies.
Exactly. We've got a whole mountain of sources here.
Mhm.
Case files, interviews, you name it. Even some skeptical takes on their work.
Sounds juicy.
It is. We're talking possessed dolls, haunted houses, demonic entities, the whole 9 yards of spooky.
So, like, what's the plan? Where do we even start with all this?
Well, first, we need to set the stage. For those who might not know, Ed and Lorraine Warren were like the ultimate paranormal power couple.
Right. Ed was a self-proclaimed demonologist.
Demonologist. Now, hold on. For folks who might not be familiar with that term.
Basically, someone who studies demons.
Okay, so like the demonic version of, I don't know, an entomologist studying bugs?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But instead of creepy crawlies, we're talking about entities from another realm, right? And Lorraine Warren, she was a clairvoyant. She claimed she could see spirits, see the future, that kind of thing. Together, they founded the New England Society for Psychic Research. They basically became the go-to experts for anything supernatural.
Okay, so they were like the Ghostbusters of their time. But like, for real.
Kind of. And to store all the quote-unquote demonic artifacts they collected.
They made what?
The Occult Museum.
Seriously?
Yeah. Just imagine a museum filled with objects supposedly possessed by evil entities.
Dude, I'm already getting chills just thinking about that.
Spooky, right.
But let's get into some specific cases, shall we? I think we got to start with Annabelle.
Oh, yeah, the doll. Everyone knows Annabelle.
Thanks to those movies, right? But what's the real story behind that creepy Raggedy Ann doll?
Okay, so the story goes, these two roommates call the Warrens, totally freaked out. They're convinced this innocent-looking doll is, like, moving on its own, leaving creepy notes. One of them even gets scratched.
Hold up, a possessed doll scratching people.
Yeah.
That's messed up.
Right. But here's the thing. The Warrens didn't just chalk it up to, a restless spirit or something. They claimed it was something way worse. An inhuman presence, using the doll to, like, lure in a human soul.
So it's not just a haunted doll, it's like a demonic trap.
Exactly. It plays on that primal fear we all have, the fear of something evil hiding behind something innocent.
Yeah, no, that's seriously creepy. So what happens next?
The Warrens take Annabelle. They lock her up in their occult museum.
Good idea. Keep that thing away from me. But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Nope. It becomes this, like, cautionary tale, like, hey, don't mess with forces you don't understand.
Right. And this whole idea of the Warrens as protectors, like
Yeah.
they're standing between us and the demonic, that's a big part of their story, right?
Definitely. It's like a modern-day exorcist story.
All right, well, from a creepy doll, let's move on to a full-blown haunted house. You know what I'm talking about, right? The Perron family case, the one that inspired the first Conjuring movie. That one really put the Warrens on the map, didn't it?
Totally. The Perron family moves into this old farmhouse in Rhode Island, and almost immediately, things start getting freaky. We're talking disembodied voices, objects moving on their own, even physical attacks.
Oh, no, thank you.
The Warrens get called in, of course, and what do they find? The house is haunted by the ghost of a witch.
A witch, come
Oh.
on. That's like horror movie 101. What was her name?
Bathsheba Sherman supposedly lived there in the 1800s.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, objects being haunted. Now we're talking about a whole location, a house saturated with bad vibes. It makes you wonder, right? What kind of energy can a place hold? And how can that mess with the people who live there?
That's a big question the Warrens explored, like, their whole career. They believed places could absorb negative energy, especially if there was, like, violence or tragedy there, and that energy could manifest as, paranormal activity.
So it's not just ghosts. It's like echoes of the past imprinted on a place. That's pretty spooky. But this case, it also brought up something else.
What's that?
Skepticism.
Ah, right. Not everyone bought into the Warrens' claims.
Some people thought maybe they were, embellishing the story for dramatic effect.
That's a tension that follows them everywhere, really. This push and pull between belief and skepticism. And, it's something we'll keep coming back to as we go through their other cases.
Definitely. But speaking of controversial cases, we got to talk about the big one. The Amityville Horror.
Oh, man, Amityville.
Yeah, even if you haven't seen the movies, you've heard the name, right?
It's like synonymous with haunted houses.
Right. So, remind me, what went down there?
The Warrens investigated this couple, George and Kathy Lutz, who claimed their house was, like, overrun by a demonic presence. So intense they had to flee after less than a month. The Warrens' investigation actually shows up in The Conjuring 2, by the way.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, their version of what happened, focusing on the demonic side of it. It's like the movie is blurring the lines between their real work and Hollywood.
Wild. But Amityville, that whole thing is super controversial, right?
Absolutely.
Didn't some authors call it a total hoax?
Yep. Claimed the Lutz family made the whole thing up for money.
And of course, Lorraine Warren denied it.
Vehemently. She insisted the demonic activity was real.
So how do we even begin to separate fact from fiction in a case like that? There's so many conflicting accounts. What do you think?
That's the thing with these paranormal cases, right? They often hinge on, like, subjective experiences, eyewitness accounts, stuff that's hard to prove or disprove.
Okay, that makes sense.
And remember, the Warrens used tools like dowsing rods and Ouija boards.
To talk to spirits?
Yeah. And those methods, while they're not exactly embraced by, the scientific community.
Right. So it's up to each person to decide what they believe, I guess.
Yeah.
To weigh the evidence, consider the different perspectives.
Exactly. And speaking of different perspectives, we should hop across the pond for a minute to England.
Oh, why? What happened there?
Poltergeist time.
Seriously. Tell me more.
This was back in 1977. The Warrens get called to investigate this family in Enfield, London.
Enfield. Okay.
And this family, they're claiming they're being terrorized by a poltergeist.
Okay, I'm listening.
Objects moving, disembodied voices, the works. There were even reports of one of the daughters levitating.
Whoa, levitating.
Yeah.
Now, that's something I'd have to believe. But what makes this Enfield case so interesting, and I bet controversial, is that there were other paranormal investigators on the scene, too.
You got it. And their accounts of what went down and of the Warrens' involvement, let's just say they differ quite a bit.
So even within the paranormal community, there was disagreement about the Warrens and their methods.
Oh, yeah, big time. For example, Guy Lyon Playfair,
Who's that?
a parapsychologist who was really deep into the Enfield case, claimed that the Warrens basically invited themselves, looking to, capitalize on the whole thing. Some investigators even barred them from the house, thinking they were disruptive, maybe even harmful to the family.
Wow, so some people saw them as legitimate researchers, while others thought they were more about fame and fortune than actually helping people. And this Enfield case, it really shows how complex and kind of messy the world of paranormal investigation is.
It's not all kumbaya and ghost hunting, that's for sure.
So many different approaches and beliefs about how to even approach these phenomena.
Right, it's like everyone's got their own piece of the puzzle, but no one's sure how they all fit together.
A puzzle with missing pieces. I like that.
But for now, let's shift gears, move from the world of ghosts and poltergeists into something a little different.
Hit me with it.
The trial of Arne Johnson. This one takes us to the courtroom.
Hold on. A trial. What's the paranormal angle here?
Oh, it's there. Trust me. This was 1981. Arne Cheyenne Johnson, he's accused of murdering his landlord. Pretty straightforward, right? Except
what?
Ed and Lorraine Warren were involved before the killing even happened.
Wait, seriously, how?
They were dealing with a supposed demonic possession case. A young boy connected to Johnson somehow.
Okay, so how does that tie into the murder?
The Warrens claimed that after they exorcised the boy, the demon jumped over to Johnson, and that this demonic influence led him to commit the murder.
Whoa, that's insane. And they actually tried to use demonic possession as a defense in court.
They did.
Come on, did the court buy it?
No way. The demonic possession defense got tossed out, and Johnson was convicted of manslaughter. But the case blew up, Everyone was talking about free will, the influence of evil. Can a demon actually make someone kill?
Right. And that case even got turned into a book called The Devil in Connecticut and inspired another Conjuring movie.
The Warrens in Hollywood, name a more iconic duo.
Right. But they were good storytellers. I'll give them that. Whether their stories were entirely true or, jazzed up for dramatic effect, they knew how to capture people's imaginations.
Totally.
And their stories weren't just about ghosts and demons. They were also about us, about good versus evil, faith versus doubt, like the human stuff that we all grapple with.
Absolutely. And as we keep going with this deep dive, we'll see how these themes keep popping up, especially in the chilling case of the Snidecker house.
In Snidecker house. All right, lay it on me. What's that one all about?
Picture this. A former funeral home in Connecticut.
Okay, that's already creepy. I'm hooked.
The Snidecker family moves in, and wouldn't you know it, they claim the place is crawling with demons.
Classic. What kind of stuff was happening?
The whole shebang. Disembodied voices, apparitions, physical attacks, even sexual assault.
Whoa, this is getting dark.
It is. The Warrens get called in, obviously. And their investigation, it gets turned into a book called In a Dark Place, The Story of a True Haunting.
Another book, another movie. These guys were prolific.
They were. And that book, it inspired the movie The Haunting in Connecticut.
Of course it did.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The author of that book, Ray Garton,
Yeah.
he later said he had serious doubts about the Snider's claims. Yeah, and he even questioned Lorraine's credibility, like maybe she exaggerated or even made up some parts of the story.
Wow, that's a huge twist. So we're not just questioning the paranormal claims, but the Warrens themselves.
Right.
And that brings us to a whole new level of this deep dive, the question of credibility.
Exactly. And we're just getting started. The Snenker house, right. It really throws a wrench in things. Like, up until now, we've been taking the Warrens at their word, mostly. But what happens when the people who are actually writing about their work start having doubts? It makes you think, how much of what they told us was, filtered through their own beliefs?
Yeah, it's like we're peeking behind the curtain,
Yeah.
seeing how the magic trick is done.
Yeah.
And that leads us to, well, the critics, the skeptics who weren't afraid to call the Warrens out. What were their main gripes?
A lot of the criticism centered on their methods, or lack thereof.
What do you mean?
Well, they were often criticized for not being, scientific enough. They relied heavily on subjective experiences, eyewitness accounts, and tools like, dowsing rods and Ouija boards.
Yeah, I mean, those aren't exactly tools you'd find in a science lab.
Right. And the scientific community, well, they don't exactly consider those reliable methods for proving the existence of, say, a demon.
Makes sense. If you're going to claim a house is haunted, you better have some pretty solid proof.
Exactly. And that's where guys like Perry DeAngelis and Stephen Novella come in.
Who are they?
They were paranormal investigators, but they took a more scientific approach, They wanted hard evidence, solid methodology. They actually went and investigated the Warrens' evidence themselves.
No way, seriously.
Yep, they looked at artifacts, photos, videos, the whole shebang. They were looking for any concrete proof of, actual paranormal activity.
So they weren't just like armchair skeptics. They actually did the work. What did they find?
Well, let's just say they weren't exactly convinced.
Oh, come on, tell me.
Yeah.
Did they debunk the Warrens' claims?
Pretty much. They called the Warrens' evidence blarney, like hot air.
Wow, they didn't hold back.
Nope. And Novella, he even accused the Warrens of having predetermined conclusions, meaning they went into these investigations already believing it was paranormal instead of being open to other explanations.
Confirmation bias. Classic. We all do that, right? See what we want to see.
Yep. But to be fair, the Warrens didn't just sit back and take the criticism.
Oh, I bet they had something to say about that.
Lorraine Warren, she countered those arguments by saying that skeptics like DeAngelis and Novella, well, they didn't believe in God. And she implied that their lack of faith, prevented them from seeing the demonic evidence.
Whoa, hold on. So basically, if you don't believe in the supernatural, you're not going to see it. Is that what she's saying?
Seems like it.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. But Novella, he fired back with a pretty good point. He said it's not about belief or faith. It's about critical thinking, about scientific methodology. Skeptics, scientists, they rely on evidence and logic, not just gut feelings or, preconceived notions.
Okay, I see his point. It's about approaching these things with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
Right? Demanding evidence, testing claims rigorously.
Exactly. And this whole debate, faith versus reason, the subjective versus the objective, it's really at the core of the Warrens' legacy,
Their work kind of forces us to ask these big questions. Like, how do we explain the unexplained? Can we reconcile personal experience with scientific inquiry?
Right.
And are there limits to what science can explain? Or are there just things we haven't figured out yet?
Good questions. And whether they intended to or not, the Warrens made us confront these head on. And their influence goes beyond just paranormal investigation, too. Think about all the horror movies their cases inspired. They brought these stories to a whole new audience.
Totally blurring the lines between fact and fiction.
Right. And speaking of blurred lines, there's that elephant in the room we need to address, the controversy that came out after Ed Warren's death.
Oh, you mean the allegations from Judith Penny?
Exactly. Back in 2017, she came forward with those incredibly serious accusations against Ed Warren.
A 40-year relationship starting when she was just 15.
It's heavy stuff. Child sexual abuse, manipulation, the whole thing. She even filed a lawsuit against Lorraine Warren and her family, detailing years of alleged abuse and coercion.
Man, that casts a really dark shadow over their whole story, doesn't it? It makes it really hard to reconcile this image of them as, fighters against evil with the possibility of such darkness in their own lives.
It's tough, and it makes you think about how we deal with the legacy of figures like this. People whose work we might find fascinating, but whose personal lives turn out to be, well, deeply flawed.
Yeah, it's like, how do we separate the art from the artist? But in this case, the lines are so blurry, it's almost impossible.
And it raises the question, like, how do we come to terms with the Warrens' contributions to the field of paranormal investigation while also acknowledging these disturbing accusations?
It's a tough one. It highlights how important it is to be critical, right? Especially with something like the paranormal, where the evidence is often subjective and interpretations can be so different.
We got to be aware of bias, of sensationalism, of the potential for people to be exploited.
So where do we go from here? How do we make sense of the Warrens? With all the fascination and skepticism, the inspiration and the controversy, what's the takeaway?
For me, it's about finding that balance between being open-minded and thinking critically.
Okay, I like that.
Being willing to entertain possibilities beyond what we know, but also demanding evidence, scrutinizing claims, and recognizing that people, even famous investigators, are capable of messing up. The Warrens may not have given us all the answers about the paranormal, but they definitely brought up some important questions that are still relevant today.
And they left us with all these incredible stories. Stories that fascinate us, scare us, and maybe even inspire us.
Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, there's no denying the Warrens left a mark on our culture.
So we've been through a lot, right? Haunted dolls, demonic possessions, even a murder trial with a demonic possession defense. We've heard from the skeptics who question everything the Warrens did, and we've talked about those disturbing allegations against Ed Warren. It's been a wild ride for sure. But what's the lasting impact? What do we make of the Warrens and their work now?
It's messy, that's for sure. They were pioneers in a way, brought paranormal investigation into the mainstream. Love them or hate them, their cases have fascinated people for decades. Books, movies, TV shows, you name it. They tapped into that part of us that loves a good ghost story, that wants to believe in the unknown.
And let's be real, their influence on horror movies is huge. The whole Conjuring universe. That's their legacy right there.
Yep.
But it's not just entertainment, is it? Their work makes us think about some pretty big things.
It does. What is reality, really? How much power does belief have? And what are the limits of science?
Yeah, they pushed us to consider that there might be things out there we just don't understand yet, things science can't explain. And they forced us to look at our own beliefs, too, about good and evil, the spiritual world, the possibility that darkness could be lurking anywhere.
But then there's the other side, the criticism of their methods, the lack of hard evidence. And those abuse allegations against Ed Warren, they definitely complicate things.
It's a reminder that things aren't always black and white. People are complicated. And even people who do good things can have a dark side.
It all comes back to being critical, right?
Yeah.
Especially with something like the paranormal, where proof is hard to come by. We have to be aware of bias, sensationalism, the possibility of people being taken advantage of.
So, after this deep dive, where do we go from here? How do we reconcile all of this? The fascination, the skepticism, the inspiration, the controversy.
I think it's about finding that middle ground. Being open-minded, but also critical. Being willing to consider possibilities, but also demanding evidence, questioning everything, and remembering that everyone, even famous investigators, can be wrong. The Warrens may not have given us all the answers, but they asked some really good questions. Questions that are still relevant today.
And they left behind some amazing stories. Stories that make us think, scare us, and maybe even inspire us. Believer, skeptic, or somewhere in between, the Warrens definitely left their mark.
They gave us a peek into a world where the line between reality and the supernatural is blurry, where darkness might be closer than we think, and where the search for truth can be both exciting and, well, kind of scary.
Their stories, they're like warnings, A&D invitations, all at the same time. Warnings to be careful and invitations to explore the mysteries that are out there. To remember that the world is a strange and amazing place, full of things we may never fully understand, and that people are capable of incredible things, both good and bad.
Well said.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Ed and Lorraine Warren, I gotta say, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep searching for your own truth. Look into the cases we talked about, read the books, watch the movies, even check out what the skeptics have to say. Make up your own mind, based on the evidence and what you feel is right. And hey, most importantly, stay open to the possibilities. You never know what's out there. The world's a fascinating place, and the Warrens, love 'em or hate 'em, reminded us of that.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, folks, until next time, keep those lights on, just in case.